Imagine, the date is the mid-1970s. You're the father of a middle-class family in São Paulo, Brazil. You wake up early in the morning, work your shift at the factory, and return home exhausted. On the surface, everything seems fine because you have savings in the bank, money you've saved by working for years, set aside for your child's university, tucked away to one day open a small shop. You feel secure. To you, cash is a shield, a guarantee, a future. The next day, you wake up and open the newspaper. Inflation, 84%. Overnight, in a single night, that money melted by half. The dream of the shop evaporated. Your child's university was postponed, and you had done nothing but follow the rules. This video is the story of that father. And at the same time, it is the story of everyone living in any city in the world today, in 2024. Because the system hasn't changed. It has only turned silent. The mainstream narrative says, holding cash is safe. When markets crash, when the economy shakes, cash becomes a sanctuary. They say, cash is king. But what actually happens is this. Cash is a carrier of the world's best designed invisible tax. Inflation appears as if it isn't a tax. No one comes to your door. No one makes you sign a paper. No one withdraws money from your account. But every year, every month, every day, the purchasing power of the money in your wallet quietly evaporates. This is exactly why it is called the invisible tax of inflation. You don't feel like you're paying it until it's too late. Warren Buffett described this mechanism years ago. Inflation is a far more devastating investment tax than any corporate tax on capital. Think about it. In a country, annual inflation is running at 8%. You receive 2% interest at the bank. The mathematical reality is this. You are losing 6% every year. The number in your account might be growing, but the real value behind that number is shrinking. This is like a bank robbery, but the robber is invisible to the eye. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Now, let's perform an autopsy on the past. Not emotional, but surgical. In 1913, the Federal Reserve was established in the United States. That same year, a dollar had a certain purchasing power. By the time we reach 2024, it takes approximately $33 to obtain the purchasing power of that $1. In other words, over the last 110 years, the value of the American dollar has melted by approximately 97%, a 33-fold erosion. This figure is not an accident. It is a policy. Let's look together at what Turkey experienced during this process. In 2003, the Turkish lira was reorganized and 6 zeros were dropped. That is, 1 million liras became one new lira. In the 20 years since 2003, the Turkish lira has lost approximately 98% of its value against the dollar. Someone holding lira in the bank lost almost all their savings in dollar terms during this process. In Argentina, this process is even more striking. Since the 1970s, Argentina has used 5 different currencies. The peso, the austral, the peso again, each one a victim of inflation. In 2023, annual inflation exceeded 212%. For Argentine citizens holding cash, this meant losing half of their savings every 6 months. So, is this only a developing country problem? Germany, 1923. Hyperinflation in the Weimar Republic. You've probably seen the photos of people carrying sacks full of money just to buy a loaf of bread. Those people weren't stupid. They weren't people who didn't follow the rules. They simply trusted cash. Japan post-1990. With the bursting of the asset bubble, they fell into the deflation trap. But take note, even during the deflationary period, Japanese citizens waiting in cash were not safe, because economic stagnation meant job losses, falling incomes, and lost opportunities. Even if cash gained value, the system kept them running from behind. Don't misunderstand what we discussed so far. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is a cold-blooded analysis of the system's design. The fundamental goal of modern central banking is not to keep inflation at zero, but to keep it at a manageable level. Most central banks adopt a 2% target. It sounds innocent. 2% is almost nothing. But calculate this. With 2% annual inflation, the purchasing power of your money drops by half in 35 years. So, if you're 35 years old today and saving cash for retirement, when you retire, the value of that money will be half of what it is today, with mathematical certainty. Why does this policy exist? Because mild inflation oils the economy. It relieves debtors, encourages consumption, and supports growth. But the loser of this equation is always the same group, the middle class that saves, waits in cash, and follows the rules. Economists call this the regressive effect of the inflation tax. In other words, this tax hits those without wealth harder than those who have it. A wealthy person's portfolio contains stocks, real estate, and commodities. These gain value with inflation. But the middle class's savings in the bank, they quietly melt away. Imagine, this time, it's the mid-2010s. You are a software engineer in Bangalore, India. You earn a good salary. Every month, you deposit a portion of your salary into a savings account. You feel secure. But in India during this period, inflation averages between 6 and 8%. Your bank interest is 4%. Every year, you are losing between 2 and 4% in real terms. When you look back after 10 years, the number has grown, but the real purchasing power has remained almost the same or even declined. The scenario is global. The same story plays out with different accents in London, Lagos, Buenos Aires, Istanbul, and Jakarta. And this is where the great fallacy is hidden. What the middle class was taught was to save. They were told, don't spend, save. This advice was presented as a social virtue for decades. But no one said this. What you invest in is as important as how much you save. In fact, it is even more important. Saving cash is not a virtue. Saving cash and not protecting it against inflation is a slow-motion loss. Now someone will say, okay, cash is bad, but there is gold. Gold is a safe haven. Partially true, but only partially. Gold preserves purchasing power in the long run. This is a historically verified fact. But gold can also be extremely volatile in the short term. In 1980, the price of gold reached a peak. Someone holding gold for the next 20 years actually lost money in real terms until the 2000s. 20 years. Gold is a safe haven, but it is a haven that requires long-term patience and strategy. The real point is this: no asset is an unconditionally safe haven. The concept itself is a fallacy. Every asset gains value under certain conditions and loses value under others. But cash, under most conditions, loses in the long run. This is especially true for cash compared to other assets. At the beginning of 2020, COVID-19 panic had gripped the whole world. Markets were crashing. Everyone was fleeing to cash. Right around that time, Warren Buffett said something about holding cash in an interview. He stated that cash was a terrible investment, that inflation systematically eroded its value, and that waiting in cash over the long term was a guaranteed way to destroy wealth. The expression cash is trash is actually a summary of a thought Buffett has repeated in different forms for years. But pay attention. This expression does not mean never hold cash. Buffett himself holds billions of dollars in cash, but he holds it as a short-term tool to seize opportunities. Cash is not an asset to be held. It is a tool to be used. The distinction is subtle but critical. Now let's take a step back and see the system as a whole. The modern financial system is built on this foundation. Money has a cost. This cost is inflation. If you don't put your money to work, the system secretly takes it from you. This is not a conspiracy. It is a design itself. And understanding this design is the first step toward developing a defense against it. The system produces two types of people: those who understand what money is and put it to work, and those who don't understand what money is and keep it waiting where they think it is safe. The first group directs their assets into instruments that provide returns above inflation: stocks, real estate, inflation index bonds, commodities, productive businesses. The second group waits at the bank, and the system quietly feeds off them. This distinction is not about income level. It is about financial literacy. And financial literacy should not be a privilege. It should be a survival skill. In South Korea, during the 1997 Asian crisis, citizens donated gold to save national reserves. This was a symbolic act, but behind it lay a deep truth. People intuitively felt that tangible assets, not cash, carry real value. In Zimbabwe, in the late 2000s, hyperinflation went so far that people ran within minutes of receiving their wages to spend the money. The next day, the same money bought less. This was a phenomenon called instant inflation. In Venezuela, in the late 2010s, annual inflation exceeded hundreds of thousands. The middle class became poor overnight, simply because they held on to cash. These examples can be dismissed as extreme cases, but every extreme case is an accelerated version of an ordinary mechanism. The difference is a difference of degree, not a difference of kind. At this point, I must state, this video does not tell you buy this, sell that. This is not investment advice. This is an intellectual framework created to help you understand how the system works. But from this framework, these practical truths emerge. Cash is a short-term tool. It is used as an emergency fund, while waiting for opportunities, or while saving for a specific purchase. It is not a long-term wealth preservation tool. Any investment that does not provide a return above inflation does not truly earn. You need to make this calculation every time you evaluate. Diversification is a foundation of risk management. Concentrating in a single asset, a single currency, or a single geography increases vulnerability to the system. Financial literacy is not an option. It is the fundamental skill for survival in the modern world. Imagine if a financial literacy class were given in a school. If you were taught this, inflation is an invisible tax. If you don't put your money to work, the system takes it from you. There is no such thing as a safe haven. There are only different risk profiles. But this lesson was not given, because for the system to work, the majority must not understand these mechanisms. This is not a conspiracy. It is just a design. And understanding the design is the first step to standing against it. If that father in São Paulo had possessed this knowledge in the 1970s, perhaps he would have directed some of the money in the bank toward other assets. Perhaps the dream of the shop would have stayed alive. Perhaps his child's university would not have been postponed. Knowledge does not change the past, but it shapes the future. Cash is not a safe haven. At best, it is a temporary stop. At worst, it is a silent destruction. And now you know this. Thank you for watching the video until the end. Do you think cash is a safe haven? Let's meet in the comments.